I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week, we're going to be looking at three categories, these sort of leftover categories, before we get more into what I consider the serious section of the awards contender race, where sooner or later, we're either going to get these Oscar nominations to be announced. We're going to get the PGAs, the DGAs, the WGAs, a lot of the sort of precursors that will be coming up soon. I'll be reacting to those, giving your analysis so we can totally understand the race. However, I like to do these videos too because I don't think any other people really sort of do these deep dives on these technical categories, which ultimately are the categories that help you make the sort of excellent predictions overall in terms of overall percentage. So that's what I'm here doing. Use the timestamps in the comments down below if you don't want to hear certain thoughts on certain categories or whatnot. Jump around. I've made it easy for you, or if you just want to see my predictions, just jump to the descriptions. You can see them all there. But without further ado, let's just jump into it. The categories I'm going to be looking at today are Best International Feature, Best Editing, and Best Visual Effects. Starting off with Best International Film, and my first pick to get nominated, and I think to win right now, is going to be Drive My Car. Now this is in a very unique situation because some people think it could get in for Best Picture. I'm not predicting it right now, but it is in this sort of large critical appreciation sort of buzz, because not only did it win the New York Film Critics Circle Award, but it also won the Los Angeles Critics Circle, and it also won many other critics groups awards, not only for Best International Film, but for Best Picture. There are multiple critical groups that are saying this is the best movie of the year, let alone the Best International Feature. Now, sometimes we see this sort of diverge. Last year was a classic example in which First Cow got a lot of critics groups and then ultimately didn't get really anything at the Oscars. So when we're looking at this, we can't always sort of overreact to the critics because the critics are not always the industry. However, it has never happened where the New York critics and the LA critics both agreed that this was the best movie of the year. So if everyone thinks this is the best movie of the year, well, there's a very high likelihood that this will get in at the very least for an international feature nomination. This is also potential for Best Director because we've seen these international directors get into that fifth slot. I'm not doubting that, but right now we have a bunch of critics groups really raving about the movie. What does that do? That puts that on people's radars, particularly Academy members, to go out and see the movie. So I think it's going to get nominated because of that. Also, we've seen in the past couple of years, Asian cinema really sort of blossom and get recognized. South Korea, of course, obviously with Parasite a couple of years before that. The Shoplifters from Japan. So we're starting to see a little bit of a momentum towards Asian cinema that we haven't really seen in quite a bit. So I think that extra little bit of factor gives me a little more confidence that it's not like they haven't been nominating any Asian movies. They have been. Plus you have a critically acclaimed movie. Drive My Car just seems to make sense here for this first slot. And then my second pick, I'm going to go with A Hero, which is the latest film from Asghar Farhadi, and he's a director who has won this prize twice for A Separation and The Salesman. So he's a very well acclaimed director. Both the critics, the audiences like him, but also this group, the Academy. He's won twice in this category for his films. So there's a strong chance that he's going to get nominated again, particularly in this case of A Hero, because it's critically acclaimed. And then I think the other added factor of it is that it's being distributed by Amazon. So for a lot of these international feature categories, a reason why maybe Drive My Car may not get in for Best Picture is just because it doesn't have a mainstream large distributor that can really campaign for the movie, that can really get it in front of the right people so that enough people ultimately see it so that they vote on it. That's what the large sort of responsibility of a distributor is, to make sure, particularly in this Oscar campaigning race, do they see it? Well, Amazon is a big distributor. They have a lot of money. They're going to put it behind some big movies. They don't have a real quote-unquote huge movie, or like a big movie that they're going to campaign, aside from something like Being the Ricardos, which means they can put a little bit more of their focus on smaller movies like A Hero. So you got Amazon behind it, which is big. It's streaming now, so I think a lot more people are going to see it right in time for this Oscar voting sort of push. And this is, once again, like I said, a film from Asghar Farhadi, a very well acclaimed, critically acclaimed movie, once again from a two-time winner. So I think that this is close to a lock for a nomination. But with this category, it's always very strange, so we never really know. But based on what we've seen in the past and the sort of talent behind it and the distributor, it makes sense that it should go here. Then in my third slot, I'm going to go with Flea. Now, Flea is a very interesting movie because we're not exactly sure how it's going to play out. It is one of the very first few movies, really, that's going to be campaigning and potentially could even get in to Best Documentary, Best Animated Film, and Best International Film. That was very rare. There was rules against sort of the overlap in years past, but those have sort of dissipated, and we've actually seen certain movies get nominated in a couple of these categories. Most notably, Honeyland from North Macedonia got nominated for Best International Feature and Best Documentary in the same year. here. So that shows us that the Academy, if they really like a movie, they're not afraid to nominate in a bunch of scenarios. And I think Flea would be the right movie. First of all, it's very critically acclaimed. It's being campaigned in those two other categories, so there's a strong sort of sense of appreciation and love for the movie. It's also being campaigned by Neon. Now, Neon is the studio behind Parasite, which got its Best Picture win, behind I, Tonya, when they first came onto the scene and got that movie a bunch of nominations and ultimately an Oscar win. So this is a distributor I have a lot of faith in terms of getting these nominations. And because actually this year they don't really have a key Best Picture potential in something like Spencer's probably their biggest movie, but because they don't have a sort of a big Power of the Dog or a King Richard or something, they're going to focus a little bit more of their effort on just getting as many nominations as possible, and that may help with a movie like Flea, in which you can get 3 sort of nominations, maybe even something like Best Picture, potentially. I know they're campaigning for that, but I don't think that's necessarily possible. But as a matter of fact, I think if any category it's going to get into, it could get in probably the most likely in Best International Feature. This is from Denmark. You know, Denmark is a country that's done very well at the Academy. As a matter of fact, in 6 out of the last 10 years of the last decade, a movie from Denmark has been nominated. So this is a very well appreciated, recognized country that puts a lot of films out there and resonates with the Academy. Plus we got this movie Flea with a strong distributor that's being campaigned in 3 different categories. There's a lot of sort of things that are going for Flea. So I think because of the country aspect, because of the strong distributor that we've seen do well with international films in the past, look at Parasite, it won Best Picture. And also, I think because of the quality of the film, this is a very well critically appreciated movie. Plus, if you look at something like Critics' Choice, it got in for Best International Film and for Best Animated Film. So it has that sort of boost to it as well. Then in my 4th pick, I went with The Worst Person in the World, which, like Flea, is also being distributed by Neon, which is a positive sign that we have a strong distributor that can get in front of the right people. This is also a movie that not only has been getting a lot of the critical support in this category, it's also been getting support in other categories, particularly Best Actress and a couple of others as well. So there's a strong support from this from the critics. Lots of critical reviews, played the festivals, which is important, you know, but what is sort of concerning to me and why I have it a little bit lower is this does seem like the critical movie of the year, and oftentimes whether it be Tony Erdmann or other movie years where we've seen these sort of critical darling burning, things like that. We've seen the critical darling just not do as well and ultimately sort of surprise and disappoint, and this does sort of give me a little bit of those vibes. Particularly because someone like Joachim Trier has been around for 3 years, yet he's never secured this nomination. You know, a movie like Thelma was sort of in contention for this category, but didn't get in. But that being said, he's still a director who has been sort of playing the festivals. You know, his last movie, Thelma, played at TIFF. His movie before that, Louder Than Bombs, with a couple stars and in English, and played at Cannes. Similarly, with this movie, so there is some support for his movies, and he is a director that is sort of well respected, which I think sort of pushes it over the edge. But I do have some concerns that this is just the critical movie of the year. But despite that, because it's being campaigned by Neon, because it's a European film, which they love their European films, that helps too. There's a lot of things sort of going for Worst Person in the World. And then my 5th pick is going to be I'm Your Man from Germany. Now I mentioned this movie in the last week's episode, the 7 Bold Predictions episode, just because I think this is a movie with 90-1 odds that could definitely get in for Best International Feature, and that's my current prediction. Because like I mentioned in that video, every year there are an average of 3 movies from Europe. So the first movie, Drive My Car, is from Japan. The second movie, A Hero, is from Iran. So the next 3 movies are from Europe. I think that should be worthwhile and noting. So right now I have Germany getting in here. This is from director Maria Schrader, who's already won a Best Directing Award for her work on Unorthodox, the TV show. So she won an Emmy for that. Her next movie, I expect to be a big Oscar movie, She Said, starring Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan, about the Me Too movement. So there's sort of a buzz around her already and an appreciation around her. So you have that sort of director appreciation already. One of the stars of the movie is Dan Stevens, a recognizable name where a lot of these international feature movies don't have, so that's a benefit too. You also have the fact that this content of the movie is about sort of like this sci-fi-esque, but also sort of an older romance, which I think will appeal to a lot of the older members of the Academy. It's being campaigned by Bleecker Street, which is some cause for concern because it's not a big distributor, so who knows how many people actually see it. But I think because of the star, because this is a fact from Germany, a European country, because there's a sort of star director, or soon-to-be star director, there's a lot of sort of buzz around the movie, enough for enough people to see it. And I think if people see it, that's ultimately the biggest hurdle when it comes to Best International Feature. Are enough people going to see it and then ultimately vote for it and like it? And I think enough people will appreciate it and it will stick with people's minds and get into this 5th slot. Then in terms of my possible contenders, my first one, I'm going to go with The Hand of God, which is the latest movie from Paolo Sorrentino, and that's a big name because he won in 2013 in this category for The Great Beauty, so there's already a strong appreciation for him and his movies, but that, was 10 years ago at this point, so there's not sort of a huge guarantee that this is sort of a well-respected every sort of year kind of a nominee like an Asghar Farhadi. Also, Netflix is distributing this, and on one hand, that's a very positive sign. Netflix is a big movie that gets a lot of nominations and gets their movie seen. On the other hand, I question their ability to do well in this category. Last year, I'm No Longer Here, Atlantics, A Son. They had 3 real major contenders, all of which could have got in for Best International Feature, all of which didn't get in, and I think in part because they had their focus elsewhere. Then I look at this year's slate. I look at The Power of the Dog, Don't Look Up, Tick Tick Boom, The Lost Daughter. Those are 4 potential strong movies that could get nominated for Best Picture. Their focuses right now are elsewhere, and I'm not sure, based on their past sort of failures in this category, and because, particularly last year, and because they have focus elsewhere, will they sort of push enough people to ultimately watch this movie? I'm not exactly sure right now. It's not totally the 100% critical acclaim. There are some sort of mixed reviews as well too, so there's that added to it as well. It's going to be very easy to see, but I'm not exactly sure if enough people will appreciate it or if Netflix will do a good enough job of just getting enough people to see the movie. And then my second possible contender, I went with Compartment No. 6. A lot of people have been putting it in their nominations just because it got in for a Golden Globe. I don't think that's necessarily true because oftentimes the Globes and the Academy, particularly in this category, very rarely sort of do a 5 for 5 overlap. Also, it's worth noting that this movie, it was the Grand Prix winner alongside a Hero, so it has the sort of festival love already. That being said, it's being distributed from a smaller studio, so there's not a lot of buzz going in from that way. It could sort of surprise and get in, but it is a little bit more of a strange movie in terms of its content as well, which I'm not exactly sure will appeal to the Academy. So right now, because it missed out on Critics' Choice, which is a very indicative group of the Academy, I felt like ultimately it would just be a possible contender. Now transitioning over into my best editing predictions, my first one, I'm going to go with Dune. Now, why is Dune the number 1 to get nominated for best editing? Was the editing so special in Dune? None of that necessarily matters. What matters is the connection to the best sound category. That's right. As a matter of fact, for the past 8 years, the best sound winner and the best editing winner have been the same. So that's a key distinction for me because I think Dune is the frontrunner to win for Best Sound, or at the very least get nominated. So if I think Dune is going to win for Best Sound, well, it should at the very least get nominated for editing. That's a strong correlation, I think, right there. Also, this is a top 5 movie, should get a lot of technical awards, plus the director, Denis Villeneuve, I think gets in, plus it gets in for picture, and oftentimes the Best Picture connection with editing is strong as well. This is a movie that's also 3 hours long, and sometimes they actually like to reward long movies. Think of The Revenant, think of The Irishman, because of this epic gargantuan tale that you're trying to tell within this sort of ultimately condensed period. I think there's an appreciation for that. The talent behind it is Joe Walker, who's been nominated twice for Arrival and 12 Years a Slave. So there's a strong connection there in terms of past nominees. So that I think the sort of connection between sound, the appreciation for the movie, a lot of things sort of make sense. The length of the movie, I think we'll appreciate ultimately the editing. Even though it's not a very flashy movie, it's enough of a Best Picture contender that I think gets in here. And then really for my second, third, and fourth nominees, I'm going to go with The Power of the Dog, Belfast, and West Side Story. And I've grouped them all together here just because the analysis is pretty much the same for all of them. There is a direct connection between Best Picture and Best Editing. As a matter of fact, for the entire 21st century, only one film has won Best Picture without getting an editing nomination. That was Birdman. And that makes sense because that movie has essentially no cuts. It's designed to look like a one-take movie, so that makes sense. But we've seen in years which Roma doesn't get in for editing, it loses. Even something like in 1917 doesn't get in for editing, it loses. Every year, if you're going to win Best Picture, you better get nominated for editing. So in my opinion, what are the front runners to win Best Picture? I would say it's The Power of the Dog, West Side Story, and Belfast. So for all those reasons, I think they get in. Regardless of talent, West Side Story has Michael Kahn, which is, an Oscar winner for editing, which helps, and then Spielberg's guy, but that doesn't necessarily matter, the names behind in the category. Ultimately, I go with what are the 3 frontrunners, regardless of how they're edited, do people really like the movie? And if you don't get in for editing, if Belfast doesn't get in for editing, I'm not predicting it to win Best Picture. It's just a very rare thing that happens. So if I look at the Best Picture winners, I go Power of the Dog, Belfast, West Side Story, they can all win. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and there's my top 4, adding in with Dune because I think of the connection with Best Sound. Then in my 5th slot, I'm with Don't Look Up, and in this category, it's very rare to go with a movie that isn't going to get nominated for Best Picture, so ultimately I wanted to go to a movie that I think is going to get nominated for Best Picture, in this case Don't Look Up, and a movie that has a lot of sort of rapid editing. This is a film by Adam McKay, and his last two movies were also big Oscar players, and both of them got nominated for Best Editing, both Vice and The Big Short. And let's not forget, Vice won the Best Editing award for the BAFTA, so there's appreciation for the way his movies are edited, the sort of rapid pace, going many different locations, style of filming. He uses less of a documentary style on this movie, but still has a lot of these sort of rapid cuts and a lot of different locations in a sort of a long period with a lot of different people as well, so there's appreciation there. Also, the editor is Hank Corwin, who's been doing movies since, the 80s and 90s with Oliver Stone, JFK, so he's a well-respected editor in his own right, and I think now starting to get a lot of the appreciation he reserves. So there could be a surprise, maybe even win in this category, but right now, because I think of the appreciation of a guy like Hank Corwin, because I think the movie's going to get nominated, and because of how sort of flashy in your face the editing is in Don't Look Up, that sort of pushes it over the edge here. My possible contenders, the first one being Licorice Pizza, and the pro being that this got in at Critics' Choice, and this is also a Best Picture contender with potentially, a director as well for Paul Thomas Anderson, so that would make sense if it gets in for editing. It got in Critics' Choice, like I said, so there's a positive there. My concern is that it's just not as flashy as a movie like Don't Look Up. And this is not someone like Paul Thomas Anderson has worked with this editor a bunch of times. It's not like this guy's been nominated before, so there's a little bit of concern. It's not like you have that element where, at least in Don't Look Up, you have a guy like Hank Corwin who was well respected. In this case, still a newcomer, but still Licorice Pizza should be a well-liked movie, and if it's a potential Best Picture contender, then it should get in for editing. And then my second possible contender, I went with Tick, Tick, Boom. I have it on the outside right now just because I'm not exactly sure if it's going to get in for Best Picture, but it does have a lot of flashy editing, a lot of editing. I think that's sort of a positive of that. Going from the one-man show to the real life and back and forth, and a lot of the intercutting is really terrific in the film. That being said, I think some people also had a problem with the editing, how sort of jumpy it was. And also, ultimately, I have a concern that it doesn't get in for Best Picture. And very rarely do we see, we see a Force Awakens in 2015, 2017, we see Baby Driver, but very rarely, once every 3-4 years, we'll see a movie that doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, but does get nominated for editing. And they get nominated for editing because it's a movie like Baby Driver, which has great editing and is fast-paced and is very much drawing attention to itself. Where Tick, Tick, Boom is a strong contender, but it doesn't necessarily have as flashy enough editing to get in without that Best Picture nomination. Now transitioning over into the Best Visual Effects category, my first pick is going to go with Dune. Now recently we had the Visual Effects Society release their nominations, and Dune was the frontrunner. Once again, sort of confirming my assumption that this is going to be the next Mad Max Fury Road, that this is going to be a huge technical appreciated movie. In my bold predictions last week, I talked about how this movie could potentially even get 6 Oscars, all in the technical categories. I think it's just going to sweep those technical categories in many respects. So it getting the most amount of nominations in the Visual Effects Society gives me a good indication that maybe this one could even win for Best Visual Effects. Also falls in line of the movies that are Best Picture nominees or feel the most Best Picture-esque winning for visual effects. So a movie like First Man, which has realistic, grounded effects, wins over a movie that has a lot of CGI effects like Avengers Endgame, or Interstellar wins, or Blade Runner 2049 wins, or Best Picture winners like 1917 wins. So we have seen this in the past where if you're a Best Picture nominee, that helps, and I think that a movie like Dune just fits the perfect build of its visual effects being grounded and real and incorporated so well with the practical effects as well. Also from the director whose last movie won for Best Visual Effects, so there's a benefit there too. And then my second pick, I'm going to go with No Time to Die, which is a nominee not a lot of people have. It's still in the 6th, 7th slot on Gold Derby, which I think is actually a bit of a fool's errand. This got in a critical nomination at the Visual Effects Society, which is Best Astounding Effects in a Photo or Real Feature. It did not get nominated in the Best Supporting category, which indicates to me that it has enough visual effects that people really appreciate. It is not something that has a couple of cool visual effects shots, but it got into the main category, which is very indicative of what's going to get nominated at the Oscars. Plus, this feels a lot of it in the same way the First Man or Interstellar, the sort of serious, high-minded, adult-driven blockbusters oftentimes get more nominated than the sort of Spider-Mans and whatnot, the MCU movies. Oftentimes these movies have a better chance to get nominated. This is also one of the highest-grossing movies of the year. So because it did well at visual effects, I think you can almost put this in a lock for Best Visual Effects here, even though a lot of people are not predicting it. I am. Then Godzilla vs. Kong is my next pick. That movie got 3 nominations at the Visual Effects Society, which is a strong sign. In many years, we're seeing, whether it be Kong Skull Island a couple years ago, or the one and only Ivan last year, particularly the ape effect or the sort of animal effect is very well appreciated by this branch. The sort of character design branch. You know, I was one of the few people to say Christopher Robin was going to get in, or last year, the one and only Ivan, I was one of the few people to say it will get in, and it does get in. And Godzilla vs. Kong fits that similar bill because you have both these 2 iconic characters rendered well, whether it's Godzilla sort of in the water and the water simulation effects that are going on there, a lot of impressive work and a lot of impressive character work, which I think the Visual Effects Society really appreciates, which is why a movie like the one and only Ivan, which very few people have seen, gets a nomination. So I think Godzilla vs. Kong, I feel confident that also gets in. Then in my 4th slot, I went with The Matrix Resurrections, which is a movie that's not an MCU movie, which I think actually helps it. Of course, the original Matrix won for Best Visual Effects, so there's a connection there. It has sort of this unique kind of world that once you watch the movie, you're like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot, you know, how interesting and unique this is, because people aren't wearing capes, but it's still sort of high-minded and budget. There's a great shot that's being spread on Twitter. I've seen a lot of Keanu Reeves coming out with all the things stuck to his back. That was fully CGI, so there's a lot of these smaller, well-done, well sort of crafted, large-scale CGI set pieces. And because I think of the appreciation and the groundbreaking efforts that the first Matrix went, I think at the very least a nomination to this Matrix here makes sense. Plus it did well at the Visual Effects Society, getting those couple nominations. And then in my 5th slot, I'm going to go with an MCU movie, and every year there's at least one MCU movie that gets in, but very rarely 2. It's only happened once in 2014 that Captain America Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy got nominated. But many years we only see one movie from the MCU get nominated for Best Visual Effects. And I'm going to go with Spider-Man No Way Home, just because it is the most critically acclaimed of that, Shang Chi, Black Widow, also the most box office, the highest grossing box office movie of the year. Now, Shang-Chi is a movie that is a little bit more easily accessible because it's an origin story, but Spider-Man's still Spider-Man to a lot of people and is a beloved character to people because it was such a critically acclaimed movie, because they're even campaigning for Best Picture. I think that sort of gets in here. It got 4 nominations at the Visual Effects Society. I don't think both movies will get in, Shang-Chi and Spider-Man. I think you have to pick which one. And right now I'm going over it with a little bit more of the popular movie, in this case, Spider-Man No Way Home. But the first possible contender is Shang-Chi because, like I said, it's a little bit of an easier story to get into, has a little bit more sort of unique visual effects that combine with the Asian cinema and the dragons and whatnot. Very well done. But that being said, I think some people had some concerns over the sort of final battle scene, which feels like a sort of a CGI mess. And the visual effects branch of the Academy doesn't really like the most CGI. Actually, they like the most done CGI. And they've not nominated movies like Black Panther, which have poor CGI in the past. And then my final nomination, I went with Free Guy. Now this is a disappointment in the fact that it didn't get any nominations at the Visual Effects Society, which is concerning, but this is the most quote-unquote original movie of the year, and has a lot of sort of the interaction with the video game world, which I think what people will appreciate. It has an 80% Rotten Tomatoes, so positive reviews, did very well at the box office, one of the few sort of quote-unquote, like I said, original movies that did well at the box office, even though the movie isn't that original, particularly if you see the movie at the very end. But that being said, I still think I have it on a possible contender because I think there's a lot of appreciation and love for that movie, a lot of high audience score. People who have seen it, for the most part, did like the movie, but because it missed out on the Visual Effects Society, it has to get knocked down to a possible contender. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below, let me know your thoughts on editing, visual effects, and international film. That's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.